Want to see two big men with big chests. And big muscles. Bumping meat. That's why I'm here. That's why I watched wrestling as a kid. You want your 5-star matches? You want your 30-minute classics? Not me. Big meaty men slapping meat. I'll wrap it up.
Hello and welcome back to Afterglow episode 54. Now, we're still doing Big Meaty Men Slappin' Meat in March. And whenever I came up with the concept for the special for the month, this game is the one I really wanted to cover the most. Because this is one in my childhood that I rented all the time. Never could find a copy of it or of any of its sibling games. And of course, I'm talking about WWF Raw. And when I mention the sibling games, it would be WWF Super WrestleMania and WWF Royal Rumble, which play very similarly to this one. But Raw, I would consider the pinnacle of the LJN button mashing style, and I did enjoy it. I mean, yeah, it got pretty cheap with the whole button mashing thing, and if you got a turbo controller, you could usually power your way through fairly easily. But I always enjoyed these games, just for the crazy gameplay you could have, especially if you're doing two-player. Raw especially, though. Raw was a blast whenever you threw in that gauntlet match that they introduced with Raw. And they still had the Royal Rumble mode that you had with the previous Royal Rumble game. So, the main one I'm going to cover here is the 32X, although that's the last one I finally got to play. Like, I rented the Genesis and the Super Nintendo version all the time, but whenever I saw there was a 32X version, I really wanted to try it. And overall, I was happy with it. But we're going to talk about all that after our music break. Nope. Stop. Hit the brakes. Stop. We're going to interrupt the music break. For some reason, the 32X replaced the awesome intro that replicated the music from Raw with whatever you just heard. And I don't know what that is. But, no, I can't have that for the intro of this episode, because it's not the music I remember. It's not the music you remember if you watched Raw as a kid or played this game. Like, I prefer the 32X version for almost everything else, but the music is kind of a letdown, especially whenever they completely changed the music to that weird honky-tonk, I don't know what it was. So for this intro, we're going to rewind it a little bit, and we're going to enjoy the Super Nintendo intro music, which is leagues better. That is so much better, right? I mean, again, I love the way the 32X version looks, and this will probably be one of the few 32X games I actually get to cover on here. But dear Lord, they really mutilated that intro music, along with the music that they use, like for the level selection and everything. The selection for how hard the game is and what type of mode you're playing. I didn't like that music either for the 32X. But that being said, the 32X version is pretty good looking compared to the other two versions, which the SNES version's no slouch either. But getting into it, of course I loved wrestling as a kid. Whenever I didn't have a Super Nintendo, but my uncle did, and he was over, and we had rented Super WrestleMania, and we had a blast with it. And it kind of got me addicted to this button-mashing style of wrestling game for a while. I missed out on Royal Rumble. None of the rental shops ever got it. I don't even remember reading about it in magazines. I didn't see Royal Rumble until after I started collecting. But they did get Raw. And wow, Raw is a game I would rent quite often. It's one of those rental games that was always there whenever I wanted it, because I had finally gotten both the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, and if one version wasn't in, the other version was. And the games played pretty similarly between the two versions, and they looked, again, not identical. I think the Super Nintendo looked a little bit better and had a little bit better audio, but the Genesis version was definitely, almost its sequel. Maybe not quite there, but almost there. But again, rented this game very, very often. I really liked the roster. I liked the fact that they added finishers for all the characters in the game. You could actually go outside the ring and you could smack around your opponent with, there's usually at least a chair and for some reason a bucket. I don't know why there was a bucket in the outside of the ring, because it didn't have any of the hillbilly wrestlers in the game, which that was usually the only reason why you'd see a bucket on the outside of the ring. But again, there's a bucket there. Another thing I loved was the fact that if you threw an opponent out of the ring and he's getting counted out, if you wanted the match to continue, you could always punch the referee to get him to kind of interrupt the count and start over. And he would make this hilarious noise whenever he got punched. It was pretty funny. Or if you wanted to, you could just run into him and knock him completely over. And when the referee was knocked over, that was when you could do the illegal holds. Like there's a choke and an eye gouge, I believe, which are completely illegal, and you can't even really do them unless the ref is knocked out or if you're in the Royal Rumble mode. Speaking of which, the Royal Rumble mode, because I never got to play the original Royal Rumble game, that was probably my favorite mode, even though I did enjoy the Gauntlet mode. Royal Rumble, you went up against all the wrestlers in the game. I believe you could get 6 wrestlers in the ring at a time. Whenever one went out, a new one would come in. And it's your standard Royal Rumble. You've got to throw them over the top rope in order to eliminate them. Really a lot of fun. But I also like the Gauntlet mode as well, which was a new mode that they put into this game. One cool feature is that you could actually have up to 6 versus 6. However, you could short how many members are on a team. So if you wanted to go crazy, you could do 1 versus 6, where you would have to take out 6 wrestlers in a row, all on the same health bar. I played this game so much, eventually I could cheese it to where I could easily get through a gauntlet match. Usually I would cheese it by doing a lockup near the ropes, throwing my opponent over the top rope to the outside, which takes a good chunk of health off of him. And then he'd get back in the ring, and I'd just continually do that till he was low in health, and then I'd knock him out and finish him. But the entire time doing this, for the most part, I didn't have a lot of friends that were really into wrestling, so I was only playing the 1-player mode. Not very often I'd get to play this 2-player. My uncle lived a ways away, so we didn't really get to play it 2-player at all. Other than that one time where we rented Super WrestleMania, that was it. So very rarely I got to play this in 2-player, and unfortunately because of that, because I'd played it so much in single-player, I knew all the techniques and all the cheap moves and everything, and little Chris would continually use those techniques in order to win. So again, it's not nearly as fun as it would be to play a fighting game where we're both kind of equal, like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, which is a real shame because I've wanted to play this game multiplayer so much. It's so much fun. But eventually I finally, when I started game collecting, got my hands on the 32X version, which I wanted to cover here, because the 32X version is just the final gloss layer on the vehicle's paint job. That's the best way I can put it. It gives everything a little bit of shine, almost. The graphics are a lot better, especially your character select. Dear God. like the pictures on the character select look so good for all the wrestlers, especially whenever you compare them to the Super Nintendo and the Genesis version. In game, everything looks just a little bit more crisp. Just a little bit better. You also, in the 32X, get another wrestler, although for some reason they chose Quang. Why would you choose Quang as your exclusive wrestler? I don't know, but Quang is who you got. But, finally being able to go back and play what I feel is the ultimate version of this game, it's kind of bittersweet in a way, because not a lot of people are going to be like, hey, let's go back and play WWF Raw. Like, I'm one of the few, and that's only because I have a lot of nostalgic memories for it. But at the same time, it was really cool putting this game in my collection, because I really, really enjoy it to this day, even. Like, if you're going to play a button-mashing wrestling game, for me, this is the one. Like, they never got any better than WWF Raw. And they could have, but they ended up going with different directions. And overall, it's a good thing, because the later games are definitely better. But, like, for kind of like an arcade-style experience, I really, really like Raw. And again, if you're going to play it today, this is one of the few games that I would seek out for the 32X. I would also probably pick up a Super Nintendo copy just because I prefer the music in the Super Nintendo, but everything else I believe was better on the 32X. It's one of the few games in the 32X that I would really, really recommend out of its tiny library. And I wanted to cover something for the 32X, and WWF Raw was definitely one of the games I wanted to pick. So go back, play some button-mashing wrestling games with WWF Raw. Again, my favorite for the button-mashing wrestling-type games. I'm going to close this out with probably a couple tracks of just some wrestling theme music from the 32X version before I end up with the outro and the credits and everything. Hope you enjoy. Alright, and welcome back to close the show out. Hope you enjoyed that little montage of some of the music from the wrestlers in the game. The first theme, Luna Vachon's theme, I always really liked because you never actually heard that in any of the arenas. Her theme only happened in these Raw games. And I also liked Lex Luger's theme whenever they went with kind of like the more... I believe it was the last one he used in WWF, to be honest. It was not the narcissist one, and it wasn't the patriotic one. And then, of course, I had to throw in Bret Hart because he was just iconic during that era. Really, really love his theme music in the WWF. But that closes out this episode. I hope you enjoy all the episodes of the Big Meaty Men Slappin' Meetin' March. If you check the show notes, there is a Discord if you want to hop in and talk about all these old games with me and maybe a few others. There's also a Patreon link if you want to support the show. For $1 a month, you can get a shout out at the end of every episode. Friends of the show include Retro Gaming Roundup. It's one of the longest running retro gaming podcasts, over 10 years now. Awesome episodes, there's interviews, there's news, all kinds of good stuff. Secret levels covering one game per episode. They've also got some special episodes out there, like the Retro Olympics, which recently came out, the winter edition for 2024. Be sure to check that out. The Retro Olympics is always a special episode to listen to, always a lot of fun. You can also check out the Lost and Gone podcast with Grim. He's got an interview on there with me, kind of an interesting interview about our thoughts on death and whatnot. It's a shorter episode, definitely worth a listen. I think he's got a few more of those coming out in the future with other members of the Secret Levels Discord, so be sure to keep an eye out for those. Speaking of other shows, my show's logo and artwork is done by TobyVonDoom from Secret Levels, and the standard intro and our outro music is done by Grim from the Lost and Gone podcast. So again, another plug for them. Be sure to check them out. We might be doing one more episode of Big Meaty Men in March before we close it out, but I hope you enjoy all these discussions of retro wrestling games, the games I specifically chose for the podcast, along with the big retro wrestling game tournament with Soups and B-Rob from the Secret Levels Discord. If you haven't listened to that one yet, go check it out because it is an awesome episode. Those two guys definitely know their games and had some awesome thoughts on a lot of old school wrestling games, some of which I had never heard of before talking to them, so be sure to check it out. But I'm going to close this episode out with that. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Have a good one.